This is Visigoth, and with us for Part 7 of the multi-part series, Magicians of Mutability, is Paul Collins. And as you've heard enough times in the series, but we'll do it one more time, Paul is the author of The Hidden Face of Terrorism, and he co-authored, along with his brother Philip, the book, The Ascendancy of the Scientific Dictatorship, an examination of epistemic autocracy from the 19th to the 21st century. And as we said, this is Part 7. And Paul, thanks for coming back to the grassy knoll.
Glad to be with you, Viz.
All right. We're going to center this interview largely around an article that you wrote that now appears on Paranoia magazine online. Is that correct?
That's correct.
Psychology of Abu Ghraib. Now, one might say, well, what's that got to do with what we're talking about with scientific dictatorships and elitism and such? But it's got plenty to do with it, doesn't it?
Oh yes. There's a definite overlap in the topics. Given the fact that we're dealing with when it comes to Abu Ghraib, the elitist mentality, and the elitist mentality not only influenced the behavior at Abu Ghraib, but also is basically forming the ideological underpinnings of this emerging scientific dictatorship. There's a definite overlap.
We're going to take one of the first subheadings of the article, in which you've entitled it "Authoritarian Hierarchicalization." You got to make these things easier for me.
Yes.
All right. Give us that again. Authoritarian hierarchicalization?
Yes. Authoritarian hierarchicalization. And basically, when we look at Abu Ghraib, it's not unlike certain other atrocities that have been perpetrated in war throughout history. Every war has one of these atrocities, these unspeakable things that were committed by officialdom, by the authority figures that we in whom we repose our trust, and we ask how this could have ever happened. We had it with Lieutenant Calley in the My Lai massacre back during the Vietnam conflict. We had the Dresden firebombing during World War II. And these were atrocities that were perpetrated by the so-called good guys, and people always, come back to this topic of when the so-called heroes commit atrocities, and try to figure out what's the origin of all this. And what I suggest in the article is that it's a result of authoritarian hierarchicalization. You see, hierarchical organizations are ideal transmission belts for certain modes of thought and behavior. And within a hierarchical framework, those occupying higher layers of stratum can selectively promulgate or discourage certain paradigms. And the occupants of the lower levels recognize those modes of thoughts and behaviors that facilitate ascension within the hierarchy, and they want to climb up, and they want to make their way up the ladder, and they recognize that favored characteristics are adopted while traits deemed undesirable by the higher superiors are eschewed. And what arises from this Pavlovian system of reward and punishment is it's euphemistically dubbed the status quo. And in the case of Abu Ghraib, the status quo was the product of the power elite, which wields substantial control over America's military establishment, which was pointed out by C. Wright Mills in his classic tome, The Power Elite. He pointed out that the power elite wields a tremendous amount of influence over the military establishment here in the United States. And we saw soldiers adopting the elite's supremacy doctrine, if you will. I do mean supremacy doctrine. These blue bloods possess such an ideological concept. They have this chimerical, and by chimerical I mean it's imaginary, hierarchical structure. And they're at the top of that structure. And all the people who do not occupy the same layer of socioeconomic strata are regarded as inferiors. They're perpetual children at best, and at worst they're considered animals or cattle to be harvested.
You know, I think terror, not terror so much, I'm sorry, torture, in back of this terrorist era we find ourselves in, started to seep into the language a couple of ways. One, we realized even before Abu Ghraib that something very wrong was going on in Gitmo and down off Guantanamo. And then also, all of a sudden, I hear Alan Dershowitz on TV yakking about, torture might be good.
Yes.
And I'm not believing my ears.
Well, wasn't that very interesting that you had this left-wing ideologue who could do nothing prior to September 11th but rant and rail at the right for supposed cruelty and supposed insensitivity towards despised minorities and towards people that could not protect themselves and were wide open for victimization. Here we have him all of a sudden desensitizing people to the whole idea of torture as a way of gaining information, and all of a sudden treating it as a necessary evil. And we had both left and right talking heads pontificating for this. Right after the September 11th attacks, and shortly before and after the imperialistic incursions into Afghanistan, as if they were really wanting to prepare us for what they had already in mind, which was what we saw at Abu Ghraib, and was what we saw with the detention of prisoners at Guantanamo, and just the dehumanization that we have seen, and this trend towards dehumanization since the attacks occurred.
This dehumanization reminds me of the way in which, I'm not saying the United States citizens are the only ones that are worked in this manner. So it's we've seen it happen century after century before. But think about how we had to demonize the Japanese and be able to drop the atomic bombs on a nation whose military was ready to surrender, but wasn't allowed to, because after you spend a couple of $1 on these atom bombs, you want to see if they work or not.
Exactly.
Dresden, completely uncalled for, probably in most or all ways much more damaging than even Hiroshima and Nagasaki.
Exactly.
And then Vietnam with the napalming. And now sometimes we're demonizing all of Islam, sometimes we're demonizing Arabs. I can't figure it out half the time, but we have to demonize them in order now to do what we're doing to them.
Yes, and the problem is, though, is that the classification of who the demons are is getting wider and wider, and the label is beginning to blanket more and more people. We all know the horrible racial derogation assigned to African Americans by backhill bubbas and KKK types. Those of the South shall rise again mentality, and that was the absolutely despicable N-word. And due to the exclusivity of the Blue Bloods clique, the N-word applies now to the vast majority of humanity, because the elite believe themselves to be gods walking the earth. They suffer from what can only be described as Olympian delirium. Mm-hmm. And this Olympian delirium goes back literally thousands of years. If you'll recall the book of Daniel, in the book of Daniel chapter 4, shortly before the Lord drives him from men and makes him go on all fours and eat the grass of the fields, Nebuchadnezzar brags in, I believe, verse 30 of chapter 4. He brags about how he built Babylon by his might and majesty, and that's an example of this Olympian delirium. And in the 18th century, notions and concepts of democratic institutions and representative constitutional republicanism began to be popularized. And with the rise in popularity, this rise in popularity of those ideas, the masses began to breathe easy, believing that Olympian delirium had finally been expunged. However, if you look at the writings and you look at the practices of the elites of modernity, you will see that there is little difference between the blue bloods of today and the kings and the monarchs and pharaohs and emperors of antiquity.
Well, that's a great point. I want to throw this in because I had mentioned to you off mic that there seems to be this bit of convergence going on, and I'll explain what I meant by that now. I get an email from a listener, someone who I respect, I mean, as far as having pretty good bones about what's going on. He's a brother from out in Chicago, and he said, I've just been reading The Tyranny of Good Intentions by Paul Craig Roberts. And I'm going to paraphrase. He says, basically, it centers on an individual by the name of Jeremy Bentham. Does that ring a bell to you at all?
Absolutely does, entirely. Jeremy Bentham came up with the idea of the panopticon.
Right.
And the panopticon was basically his attempt to, it was part, he was trying to come up with with revolutionary France's new prison system under the government shortly after the new revolutionary government after King Louis and his wife were deposed. And this was a horrible plan that included primitive machines that would be disguised as recessed toys that imprisoned children, incarcerated children would play upon, and basically through all the ideas that we have in the Constitution that point towards human dignity out the window. And I think that Foucault, while he was a Marxist, and that can't really be excused, the philosopher Foucault was correct in pointing out that the panopticon does in fact exist today, and the whole idea has been accepted and has been implemented in our modern world. It's just so hard to see it because of the PR spin that's placed on it by the media.
Well, what's interesting too with Bentham is that Arnie rightly said that, you know, from what he divined from the book, that Bentham was actually in favor of preemptive punishment or torture. And just to summarize what Bentham's about, I mean, here's a guy that was studying Latin at the age of 4. I mean, no doubt he was brilliant, but here you have that elitist mentality.
Yeah.
And in summarizing Bentham, this is his words: mankind was governed by two sovereign motives, pain and pleasure. And the principle of utility recognized this state of affairs. The object of all legislation must be the greatest happiness of the greatest number. But it gets good now. He deduced from the principle of utility that since all punishment involves pain and is therefore evil, it ought only to be used so far as it promises to exclude some greater evil. In any other words, it means preemptive torture.
That's correct. And what you're referring to there is known as hedonic calculus.
Say that again.
What you're referring to there is hedonic calculus.
Hedonic as in hedon?
Yes,
okay.
As in hedonistic. And the problem with hedonic calculus is that you get excesses on both sides of the spectrum of pain and pleasure. The interesting thing to notice about Bentham is the role that he and the Earl of Shelburne had played in fomenting the French Revolution, and you see this idea of his of hedonic calculus being implemented in France, and the blood running from the guillotines eventually going nonstop.
Interesting also that the guillotine is being brought back in, well, not brought back into United States punishment, but being introduced into American punishment. And I think the state of Georgia was on the cutting edge as far as making it one of the elements or vehicles of execution. But another thing, you know, I think of when you talk about this hierarchy also of these characters, these authoritarianism. Boy, I'm having a day. Yeah, the smart guys.
Yeah.
I mean, you have that level, but then you also have like a secondary level that are not in the elite class but are being used for their purposes, and they're the ones who are basically the jailers and the executioners. But you know, it's one of those things like I always think about Creedence Clearwater in that one song. You know, it's okay to point the cannon at someone else, but when they point the cannon at you.
That's correct.
And I mean, I think people in the United States have to realize that if it's being tested somewhere in Gitmo or somewhere off, on an island off South Carolina, or over in Iraq or Afghanistan, it's going to come to a neighborhood near you.
Well, people are, when you understand human nature and take it for what it is, it isn't so shocking to find out that people can rationalize anything and prostitute themselves out in the name of just about anything, until the very things that they are perpetrating on behalf of the hidden masters is turned in on them. And I don't think, for instance, with America, I don't think that it will that much in the way of atrocities over in Iraq or Afghanistan, or what's shaping up to look like possible conflict in Syria. I just don't see that ending in a peaceful fashion. The atrocities that are carried out in these foreign countries will not generate enough in the way of discontent amongst the population here. What it will take is something that the population directly feels itself. For instance, with the draft. If there were to be a draft, and it's looking like it's heading in that direction, the recruitment numbers are down to dismal levels because of increased casualties overseas. Then people will say, "Now hold on, wait a minute," and we'll begin to oppose this authoritarian mentality. But you can show them all the pictures of Iraqi children killed or mutilated, or Afghani people maimed or hurt, and it won't really faze them. It's when it actually comes home to them that it actually starts to impress them in any way.
All right, this is digression, but I want to throw this out because you mentioned it, and I think people should be aware of it as well as you, Paul, and Philip. And maybe you do, but yes, all of a sudden now appearing across the crawlers at the bottom of our screens and our morning news, which to me is one of the greatest subliminals there is, we're hearing about, yes, these drop-off numbers and recruitments, the Marines can't meet their quota, blah, blah, blah. Then all of a sudden, on the website, CFR.org, the wonderful home of the Council on Foreign Relations, one Max Booth has written a white paper stating that maybe it's time. Now, are you familiar with this at all?
Pardon?
Paul, are you familiar where I'm going with this?
I believe so. Max Booth, the arch neoconservative, so I'm pretty much getting an idea of what blueprint you're from.
Now, on this March 10th, it's still on the homepage, but you can always archive this and you hear this later on. But Booth has written a paper saying maybe we should start to offer citizenship to illegal aliens, legal aliens, and basically anybody in the face of the earth that wants U.S. citizenship if they'll go into the military. And I'm saying to myself, so we're whoring out our U.S. citizenship for anybody that'll fight for the empire. Is that really what we want? So I'm wondering right now, Paul, if what we're seeing, again, is one of these psychological ops on people in the United States that, well, if you don't want to draft, this is what we might do. But you know what? When you go ahead and mongrelize your culture, with every culture, language, you cease to be what you are, and like every other empire that's been on the wheel, as Robinson Jefferson would say, is bound to fall.
Well, the problem is that a lot of these immigrants come here because they have such a dismal political and social and economic infrastructure in their own countries, and I can feel for them. I honestly do. But when they come and they don't get assimilated, and by assimilation I don't mean anything sinister. I just mean learning the language, learning the culture, and and doing as the Romans do, so to speak. They become radicalized by a number of left of center groups, and are indoctrinated into these mythical ideas of an oppressive white oppressive culture here in the United States, and into all these racialist ideas of some kind of fascistic heroic racial past that they possess. And they begin to start all sorts of trouble, and instead of sending them back to their point of origin, we would to just allow them into the military would be the highest level of folly.
Well, this is being kicked around out there. We'll see where it goes. Maybe one of these lesser of two evils that they'll present to the American public, and that is universal military draft, or anybody, open season on U.S. citizenship. We'll see what happens.
And I believe that with the draft, if the draft should occur, that's when you will finally see the American spirit of activism that's been dormant for years now awaken. Because if you'll recall back during the Vietnam era, that's what it took, was the draft to get people out in the streets. I remember when I was back in high school around 92 or 93, Dan Quayle had come forward and had said, well, there was no real opposition to the war. We were going out with patriotic fervor. We were signing up. We were going to the recruitment offices before the draft letters even hit us. And when you're a high school student, when you're a teenager, and all that you can think about is girls, fast cars, and rock and roll, it doesn't. That you take him take what he says at face value, and you accept what the authority figure says. Later on, when I began to befriend people that were from that era, that were from the Vietnam era, on both sides of the fence, individuals that were veterans of the war and individuals who had stayed here that formed a kind of a grassroots opposition to the war, I began to learn from these individuals what it was really like, and it was nothing like what Dan Quayle had described at all. There were fights at the dinner room table over this issue that spilled out onto the front yard, and that's what I believe, is that once there is a draft, and once the regular middle class American that drives the SUV is part of the soccer mom cult finds out that they're going to have to send their son over to a place where the survival level is slim to none, then you'll start to see an awakening in the American people and in the American consciousness.
An aside, if I could, about a draft rousing the sleeping people in this country. I'm not so sure, and the reason why I'm a bit pessimistic, and let me give you this anecdote. I certainly was. I was right in the middle of the whole Vietnam era. I went to college in '69. Mm-hmm. And in the spring of '70, I was playing baseball for Fairleigh Dickinson University up in metropolitan New York. And I was a jock, and I was a redneck with regard to America's right, blah, blah, blah. We're defending freedom over in Vietnam now. But as that baseball season went on, and as it waxed closer and closer to that famous May 5th, I was watching from the ball field more and more student protests, more and more gatherings outside student unions, and it got to the point at NYU, and I was playing, I was in left field, watching the student union at NYU, and what started off as like a couple of guys yelling and waving their fists turned into a tremendous outpouring of students. They gravitated over to the ball field. I had to go get a helmet to where left field, because they saw me, and perhaps rightly so, as a neo-Nazi, a jock, American, all that. Now, of course, we had Kent State, and that was just an ugly, ugly event.
Oh, yeah.
And a friend of mine said to me, and thinking about Nixon in those days, but anybody, it could be any politician now, given what we know about Republicans and Democrats, he said to me, they're going to make sure, meaning the power structure they're going to make sure this never happens again. And so, Paul, that's kind of a circuitous story to say to you, is that I believe he's right. I believe he was right then. And that is, once this starts, it's either going to be an event that's going to make everybody who protests look like they're traitors, or they're just simply going to turn out the water cannons and the German shepherds, and that's going to be the end of that.
That could be the case. I stay optimistic, however, and lean towards the idea that as things get worse, and as things start to hit home, as our pocketbooks begin to get hurt, as it's our children, our posterity that are drafted and are sent off as part of a mandatory patriotism kind of thing. It will begin to awaken in us this need for accountability on the part of the ruling elites, and possibly even a reshuffling of the deck as far as those in governance are concerned. It's taken so long because we've been asleep for so long. I was born in '74. And
you're making me feel so old.
Yeah, well, I'm dating myself too. If that's of any help.
I could have had you.
Yeah. Well, but our ground involvement, our land involvement in Vietnam had ended in '73. 75 was the fall of Saigon, if I remember correctly. So, I was at the tail end of that whole thing. They barely had the umbilical cord off of me when that whole thing, started to end and had reached its crescendo. So I didn't have the experience, nor did anybody of my generation, I guess you could call us Gen Xers, have anything as far as that experience that we could appreciate that would cause us to say, look, never again, and all. But now we're going to have our own kind of repeat of those kind of occurrences, and I believe that will start to awake people of my generation, people of the younger generations that are just now getting out of high school or are in high school right at this moment, and that grassroots activism that is inherent in Americans, that was basically awakened, as clear back as the Boston Tea Party. It will wake back up. It will not be dormant any longer. It won't have any choice but to wake up.
All right, and I want to return also to the core of the article.
Of course.
And believe me, that's fine. I mean, I digress, so forgive me. But when we talk about this use of torture as part of this pain and pleasure situation, we're really looking at very potent mechanics, if you will, of behaviorism, aren't we?
Oh yes. We're looking at something along the lines of what B.F. Skinner was talking about, where you basically treat the human being as a reactive animal, and introduce this operative conditioning, this system of rewards and punishments as a way of steering the individual or the society as a whole in the direction that you desire.
And also, when you take in consideration Huxley's vision of the future and the scientific dictatorship, and also like a caste system of alpha, betas, and such, you're looking also at someone like Dewey, right out of the same school as Skinner and Bloom also a major figure in education today, and has been for a while, actually looking at students not so much as human beings, but as like widgets or whatever, to be just trained. And that's where the education system today is going. And so we have that whole movement, as you guys have hooked into, going on now with the conditioning of young people in the education system.
Yeah, it's a complete joke. They do not take people and identify their individual talents and begin to hone and to work with those talents and give them something that can be applied to the outside world in any meaningful way. Instead, the classroom becomes sort of like a support group. We all sit with Socrates around the tree and talk about our feelings. And there's nothing, there's no real honing or improvement upon our own individual talents. Instead, there's kind of this subtle kind of process of making us comfortable with our roles as cogs in a machine.
Let me ask you your opinion on this. I look at shows like 24 Hours and Cops and CSI and all these elimination shows that have popped up since 2000, and what I'm seeing is a desensitization of Americans to brutality by law enforcement or authority figures, and two, with these elimination shows, and as gross as they're getting, a degrading of the human being for whatever fruits, in this case money, will lead them to endure. Do you think that this is, I know I believe it, but since 2000 I've seen this. Do you believe that this is a condition that's going on through mass media?
Yes, I do. It's interesting you bring up the show 24. This very season, they're in their fourth season of it, they've had a jaw-dropping 3 tortures now that I could count. And if I recall correctly, they've had 3 tortures so far in this one season, and none of the tortures were done by the terrorist. All of the tortures were done by officialdom. Mm-hmm. Were done by the group that Kiefer Sutherland, rather, his character Jack Bauer is part of the counterterrorism unit. Every single torture that's been done has been carried out and perpetrated by them. So we're getting this idea of equating heroics with torture, and this idea of necessary evil propping back up. And it's important to remember what Jefferson said. He said that there are no such things as necessary evil in government, and that the evil, when it comes to government, can only be found in its excesses.
Well, let me first say that we're up just a little bit past the halfway point in the program. This is the Grassy Knoll on Dade City Micro Radio. We have with us Paul Collins. This is part 7 of the series we've entitled Magicians of Mutability. And what I wanted to say was this whole idea of conditioning, of accepting torture, of degradation, what it also reminds me of to a certain extent, and I'm looking through it here, I'm trying to play for a little time, but I'm also thinking about what happens with human beings when they feel that they have nothing above them. And that is, I think back to Conrad's Heart of Darkness, that, if man has nothing to worry about, as these elites do, if they have no higher power, as they see it, then what could they possibly do except tend to be corrupt?
That's correct. That's correct. Basically, with my standpoint with Christianity and with as far and being a Christian, I think that I can say this with no real protestation or something rising against me. Christianity is a pathway to empowerment. It's a pathway to becoming more, into achieving, into being successful. It should be noted that Jesus said that mustard-sized faith, would cause mountains to move and whatnot. So we know that it's a pathway to empowerment. The ruling class religion, it's a pathway to empowerment too, but it is a much more sinister pathway because the Christian path, the traditional paths altogether, I would say, Judaism, the moderate versions of Islam, even some of Buddhism before it went off in a crazy trajectory, holds that with power there comes accountability, there comes obedience to a higher authority. The ruling class religion, the elite's belief system, philosophy holds that there is only power and empowerment of the individual, and that with that empowerment there comes no accountability, and the only one you're accountable to is yourself. It goes back to Protagoras and his statement that man is the measure of all things. So when you have this drive for power with no consideration for any kind of set in stone objective moral laws, you're on the slippery slope to abuse. It's inevitable, and you might as well take it as a given that atrocities such as Abu Ghraib are an inevitability.
You talk about Afghanistan as an example of the practice of the elite supremacy doctrine. Do you want to expand on that for us?
Sure. In his book, The Grand Chessboard, Brzezinski lays out a strategy that will lead to the rise of an American empire, which is really just a stepping stone to world government. You discover that in Brzezinski's other works, Between Two Ages, that world government is the goal. He says that at the very tail end of that book. Mm-hmm. But in The Grand Chessboard, the methods he discusses using show a great deal of disgust for those the empire intends to domesticate and make subjects of. And he writes in that book, quote, "To put in terminology that harkens back to the more brutal age of ancient empires, the grand imperatives of imperial geostrategy are to prevent collusion and maintain security dependence among the vassals, to keep tributaries pliant and protected, and to keep the barbarians from coming together." So we saw this prescription being put into practice in Afghanistan, where 160,000 people were driven into refugee camps by bombings, and the shock and trauma that this induced resulted in a psychologically tractable and pliant, housebroken Afghan population. And Mullah Omar's plan to make opium production illegal was overturned by the American invasion so that the opium could be sold abroad to keep the vassals like you and I in countries outside of Afghanistan docile. Mm-hmm. And the Afghan vassals, meanwhile, were punished for a reduction of 91% in the opium production, and the Northern Alliance was installed to ensure that production was brought back up to the levels prior to Mullah Omar's ban. And it's interesting to note that CNN has recently came out with a report detailing the 2005 International Narcotics Control Strategy report, which is a presidential report. And they said, and the CNN reported that this report had stated that Afghanistan is now on the verge of becoming a narcotics state, and so, but that's all right in the eyes of the elite because the vassals are expendable, and the vassals there can slave away with the opium crop, while meanwhile the vassals here can get hooked on the drugs and become docile. Because and we're expendable because in the end what it does is it sustains their very precarious economic infrastructure. But we also see the practice of that elite supremacy doctrine prior to September 11th, and I think it would be important to look into a more dated example as well, if you don't mind, Viz.
No problem. I would also say that probably we're not going to get through all the ground that we wanted to cover in one show, and so I cleverly get you to come back again.
Yes.
But let me. This is something I think you and Philip will appreciate with regard to semiotics.
Okay.
Check this out. When we bombed Afghanistan, do you remember what date it was?
Oh boy, I not offhand, no.
All right, it was October 7th, 2001. And if you remember some of the terminology used by Shrub, was he called it a crusade, remember?
Yes, exactly.
Now, listeners to the show may have remembered a couple of years ago we did this, but I want to offer this to you, that when the Ottoman Navy was crushed by, interestingly, an amalgam of the navies of Spain, the Venetian state, and the Papal states, they went ahead and they accomplished that in the Battle of Lepanto on October 7th, 1571, 430 years later to the day. Now, maybe that's just a coincidence.
It could be, but I mean, like, elites choose certain specific dates to commemorate other dates.
Right.
It should be noted that in 1905 there was this abortive attempt in Russia to start the revolution over there, and it was began on May 1st of 1905. And May 1st is the establishing date of the Order of Illuminists in Bavaria, going back to 1776.
Adam Weishaupt, yep.
Exactly. So, and anybody that's read James H. Billington's excellent book, The Fire in the Minds of Men, realizes that basically that was the beginning of socialist thought, was with the Weishauptian conspiracy, and that there was a diaspora after the group was discovered and broken up by the Bavarian authorities, and that diaspora led to a network of secret societies across Europe, and those secret societies began to coalesce more or less in the socialist revolution. Revolutionary movement afterwards, and also, that's another example where we have this possibility that there was that a date was chosen because of its commemorative value. So, I mean, like, I wouldn't write that off entirely as coincidence. This.
All right, remember that October 7th, 1571, October 7th, 2001, and I got to tell you, even as a child, I can still see myself in the schoolyard on May 1st with this dumb old crepe paper streaming down from the maypole, which is a phallic symbol, and wondering why the Russians are, traipsing out their military on May 1st. And I'm like, Russia, United States, May 1st, I'm not getting this. All right, you used the terminology in the quote that came from Brzezinski, vassals.
That's correct.
And, it reminds me of exactly what we're headed for again, in that those satanic monarchists, those royal families, are just waiting once again to come back and rule in a feudalistic manner to bring about a new dark ages like this world has never seen.
Well, those republics that were formed over there supposedly at the end of the Cold War were merely transitory in nature anyways. You can see that with the Commonwealth of Independent States. They remained economically and politically dependent upon Russia, and basically were Russia's way of gaining a majority say in the emerging EU over there. And then we see that oh boy, I can't remember offhand, the family that's the Habsburgs. Okay. The Habsburgs still carrying a large bit of weight when it comes to the political and social landscape of Europe.
I'm going to break away a bit before we cover McNamara and go any further into the 20th century, because I couldn't let this go. It comes from a book by an author you very much revere for obvious reasons, Jim Keith, and I guess it's the book Secret and Suppressed, Banned Ideas in Hidden History. And this paragraph, if I could read it, that you have in the article, it states, it purports to be a secret history of Western civilization gleaned from secret documents in the Vatican Library by a member of the Franciscan Order. The inked imprint of a Vatican Library entrance chit affixed to the original document and duplicated at the end of the article is a strong indication that the author does have access to Vatican sources. Can you tell us a little bit about the Franciscan document and what that was about?
Yes, the Franciscan document was an alternative view of history written supposedly by a monk, and this history was gleaned from the Vatican's own extensive library. It should be noted that when you look at the Roman Catholic institution, you're not just looking at a church. You're looking at what was at one time one of the most powerful political institutions on the face of the planet, and had then and still has today a very extensive intelligence apparatus. So extensive, as a matter of fact, that it was used by the Allies against the Nazis during the Second World War, and Keith was convinced that there was probably some legitimacy to the claims that this Franciscan was making in this document. And what I picked, I don't have the quote in front of me, but what I picked was from that and sourced in my article was a particular statement that the monk made concerning the ruling elites and their overall mentality. He pointed out that they were seriously psychologically disturbed. They suffered from a huge heaping helping of superstition, and this probably came from the fact that they isolated themselves from the other from the middle and lower classes of the world, and so they had basically numbed themselves to reality and dulled the human experience to such a degree that they could not relate with the common man.
You're saying that the elites couldn't relate to the common man?
Yeah, they could not. Exactly, the elites could not relate to the common man. They had just they had numbed themselves. It should be noted that you don't see a Rockefeller or you don't see a DuPont or somebody within one of those families in the mall or in the grocery store when it comes time to buy something. They have their own. They have servants that go out and get the things that they need when they want a night out on the town, so to speak. They have country clubs and different social organizations where they hobnob with one another. They're not going to they're not going to frequent the same places that you and I do. And this kind of social isolationism leads to a serious inability to relate with the common person and with the plight of the common person.
But doesn't it make sense, on the reverse, so to speak, that you would want to do that? Because if you're going to treat these people like chattel, if you're going to kill them, if you're going to abuse them, if you're going to experiment on them, you don't want a human connection to them.
Oh, of course not. I mean, if you look at the psychology of a rapist or a pedophile, the first thing that they have to do before they do the unspeakable act that they're about to commit is totally dehumanize the target of their passions, so to speak. They just basically take all human qualities and values away from the individual that they have targeted for attack.
If you don't mind, I'm going to turn this interview up a side street because of what you mentioned and because of what's going on right now very close to us in Florida. If you don't have enough background for this, by all means, Paul, it's not a big deal if you don't speak to it. I just feel led to have to table it.
Okay.
Right now, there is a missing young lady. I believe she's 11 years old.
Uh-huh.
I think back to other missing children. I think back to some high-profile deaths of children like Joan Benet Ramsey.
Mm-hmm.
I also have read the Franklin cover-up. Have you?
Oh, yes, I've read the Franklin cover-up, right. And that's coming back into the news here lately with the Jeff Gannon case and the possibility that he might be Johnny Gosh.
Great point. Great point. And I hate to say this, but I think it also is part and parcel of a set of people who feel themselves so above the law, and rightly so, they can do anything they want without punition. And I think about the way it was, under Moloch, and how it is now that these elites can basically, and I think of all those milk carton children, if you understand what I mean. These people who are not, these children who are not going to be found again, and where they might have gone and to what ends they might have been used.
Oh yeah. Oh yeah. Well, you understand though that the elite subscribe to a hodgepodge of occult ideas, and that that many of these occult ideas, these occult traditions, hold that the victimization and ultimate murder of individuals leads to you absorbing their life energies.
Exactly.
And so you can't dismiss out of hand the idea that these children might have been targeted for ritual abuse and ritual murder, and that leads us, by the way, back into the Abu Ghraib trajectory, because there is a possibility that I want the audience to consider that this might not just be a couple of grunts just getting off, so to speak, and that there might have been method to this madness, and that this might have not just been your regular abuse, but might have been satanic ritual abuse. If you look at the pictures of naked people stacked into a pyramid configuration, or the use of leashes and different devices of control, and this process of dehumanization that was employed, it is very much possible that we were seeing ritual abuse at Abu Ghraib, and people would say, well, now why would there be ritual abuse when you know we have no proof of a satanic tradition or running throughout the military? Well, we do. We had Dr. Michael Aquino, who was a colonel in the U.S. Army Intelligence, and he was a leader of the Temple of Set, which was an offshoot of the Church of Satan. And his church had been investigated by authorities both within the civilian sphere and in the military sphere on charges of molestation. And many of these children had sexually transmitted diseases in the throat and in other areas, and which begs the question: how did they get these diseases if nothing was going on? Because you're telling me that single-digit age children from daycare centers are sexually active, which is just is ludicrous. And the allegations were looked into by one really gutsy reporter for the San Jose Mercury named Linda Goldston, and you can still get her article online if you just type her name into a search engine. You'll find the article that she wrote for the San Jose Mercury entitled "Army of the Night," and she found evidence of occult practices, of ritual chambers in concrete bunkers and whatnot. Now, the military ended up dismissing most of this, but it's interesting. They quietly drummed Aquino out of the military. But it's interesting to note that the Temple of Set stayed intact and stayed in the military. So we might have had that satanic tradition that ran through the military, starting with Aquino, that Aquino tradition running straight to Abu Ghraib, and that's something that people have to consider.
So when we're talking about this kind of behavior in the military, you think it might be systemic?
Yes, I think it might be, and I think that it probably leads back to Aquino in the tradition that he had started. That he was the transmission belt for the satanic tradition into the military. He was an associate of Anton LaVey's, and he had grown disgruntled and upset with LaVey, and had broke with LaVey because he felt that LaVey was just pulling vaudeville antics and was not taking his Satanism serious enough. and so he came up with a much more hardcore, virulent form of Satanism, and the practitioners in the Temple of Set weren't just Hollywood socialites like they were with LaVey. We're talking about individuals within the military holding some rank and holding authority.
I had on Sunday, and I've not released it yet, and I really want you and Philip to listen to this when the time comes, an interview with a physician out of Canada, Dr. William Deagle, who's also a Christian, and who had worked out at the Colorado Center for Occupational Medicine, and some of the things he had to say. We have something else going on in our military, and he was referring to what's called a Rambo chip. He said and this is him stating this to Pastor Butch Paw, who has on a show called Call to Decision on Genesis Communication Network. Deagle says, and this is a transcript, they can now and are being implanted into some of our special forces to give it a surge of adrenaline and kill the reflex. He said it's all mind control. They haven't deprogrammed them, and also they still have these chips in them because they're not chips for tracking just on the battlefield, because there are at least 3 tracking chips in the shoulder, abdomen, and pelvis. So they can tell if they're laying down or if they're where they are on the battlefield, but there are also chips that are being implanted in special groups to actually control their mind. Have you come across anything like this in your research?
What I'll say to that, I haven't followed the chip angle that much. I know that there are implants, and I know that there's been work in that trajectory with nanotechnology and whatnot. What I will say through my research is that I found that the military has been concerned ever since the Civil War. During the Civil War, soldiers were upset and had reservations about firing on who they knew were other Americans, and so there was some trepidation, and there were reservations on the part of Americans when it came to the idea of killing other Americans. And the military has made it a point to look into breaking down that trepidation, to breaking down that obstacle, to getting people fighting one another without reservations standing in the way, and several different psychological tactics were experimented with to see if that couldn't be broken down. And they now have these different virtual reality training systems and whatnot within the military that basically get people to fire on with little regard for who it is that they're firing upon, without putting critical or analytical thought into it. The critical and analytical side of the brain basically goes out the door, and soldiers become by and large reactionary. What I can say is that a chip would be the final clincher. A chip would. Right. Yeah, I mean, like, you could just forego any sort of deconditioning process, put in the chip, and you're home free. All you have to do is switch it on, so to speak.
Exactly, and one of the things that I think gives what Deagle said credence also was the outbreak of violence committed against wives of soldiers when they came back, especially in Fort Bragg, North Carolina. That might be one of the reasons for it.
It could be very well be. The important thing to remember also is that this is a breaking down
of, I guess, a 10-part series that we've entitled Magicians of Mutability. And with us for this hour is Paul Collins, his books, The Hidden Face of Terrorism, and the one he co-authored with his brother Philip, The Ascendancy of the Scientific Dictatorship. If you've done the series, you know the full title, and you probably don't want me to say it anymore, but at any rate. Paul, we thank you for being with us for this part 8.
Glad to be here, Viz.
All right, now, where we left off, and we were talking, central to this whole interview, as it was part 7, was the Abu Ghraib piece that you wrote about this kind of torture taking place and its role, perhaps, in our sociology. But something that's part and parcel of an elite supremacy doctrine. Was it in place prior to 9/11? And if so, who might be, say, the chief advocate of such?
Yes, we do see the practice of this elite supremacy doctrine prior to September 11th, Viz. And we see it, the key practitioner, as far as, we see it going back literally thousands of years into antiquity, but that was so voluminous I could, of course, not in the length of an article and all. But the key practitioner that I looked at when it came to this supremacy doctrine was the individual known as Robert McNamara. He was the Secretary of Defense at one time, and he was a key practitioner of this elite tradition. And McNamara devised what was known as Project 100,000. And most Americans have no idea what this project was. They're completely ignorant to the fact that it even went on in this country. Once again, we have this problem where there's a veil over the common American's eyes, this veil that says, well, you know, the hollowed halls of officialdom, my government, Uncle Sam, would never do anything harmful towards me, and would never act in a harmful way. And this naive, childish want to and desire to believe the best in the established authority and whatnot, which I can see to a point. You know, everybody needs some security, but in this case, it's kept people from seeing certain facts concerning certain players within our government, and it's kept people from seeing certain case studies. And one of those case studies, as I mentioned, is the Project 100,000, looking to protect some of his rich friends from the draft. And he arranged for the recruitment of people who had failed the armed services test to actually go into the military. Originally, these people, because they had failed the armed services test, were considered ineligible. But through his arrangements through this Project 100,000, these men were actually let in. Men who had failed their IQ test, people from the underclass, from the urban ghettos, the poor rural South. These people were the people who were brought in to the military through Project 100,000. 41% of Project 100,000 were African American, and 40% of Project 100,000 were trained for combat. Now, what people have to keep in mind, Viz, when we're looking at this, is that these guys ended up in Vietnam during a time when McNamara, if you look at his public statements, well, actually not his public statements, but look at the different biographies out there over the man, and what we now know, what has been disclosed. McNamara was at this time privately confessing his sentiment that the war could not be won. So these poor individuals were essentially being sent on what McNamara knew to be a suicide mission. And another thing that people have to consider was that this was 1966, the time that the civil rights movement was gaining ground. And so equality may have been in vogue, but the elite tradition had McNamara going in the opposite direction, and he was waging what I would call essentially class warfare against the people. Even though there was supposed to be this paradigm shift going on, where dignity and mutual respect between the different so-called races of humanity was gaining ground.
Thinking about this eliteness and what's going on right now, do you think that we're headed for a more perfect beast of a soldier by any kind of implants We had on again Dr. Daigle, who said that black ops or special ops are chipped in at least 3 locations, one of which is to find out where they are on the battlefield at all times, and then he led he was led to talk about what the other 2 might be for, and how when they had that rash of murders down in Fort Bragg from soldiers coming back from Iraq, that maybe perhaps they weren't deprogrammed. So with this idea of a techno/human being, do you think that's in the offing for the military?
I see it definitely coming into being. I saw this, however, coming even without the technological augmentation. People have got to understand that going straight back to the Civil War, the elites found that there was this fundamental problem that they had to deal with when getting the common man to become a combatant. During the Civil War, it was found that people were hesitant to fire on one another when they realized and when they knew that the other person that they were firing on, whether they were wearing a gray or a blue uniform, was another American. And so the elite began to look into this problem through different study groups, through different think tanks, on how do you break down this timidity, these reservations that one might have when it comes to when it comes to fighting somebody and killing somebody that on a regular basis you might consider your friend. And we've seen the breaking down of this timidity, so to speak, these reservations through training with virtual reality, with training with computer programs where it becomes almost instinctual. It becomes simply reactive, and the part of the mind that looks into serious moral questions actually switches off, and the person is simply reactive.
Well, first of all, let me say this. I think you might have seen some of the video that was sent back via the internet about some of the way that, our soldiers talked, and maybe they're not the only ones, but some of the, I guess you would want to say, controlled, very calm manner in which they talked about taking a life.
Yes, it would make Hitler cringe.
Yeah, and I mean, the one, I don't know if you saw that, where they've got a wounded Iraqi laying out in the street, and they just basically talk about him, and they shoot him. It's like, wow, is that awesome?
Yeah, while I have not seen the footage, I have read extensively about that. And again, what we see is this switching off of the part of the mind that questions the moral ramifications of one's behavior, and the simply switching into a gear where it becomes reactive. It becomes it becomes a little more than the equivalent of swatting a fly. And I would like to suggest that somebody who has written extensively about the kind of indoctrination that we see here, and which involved also certain individuals involved in the MK Ultra experiments, would be an individual. He's a little bit left of center. I would say that to the audience before they go reading him. So take that with tongue in cheek. But is the author Frank Morales. And he's written extensively about this, about how this shift, this paradigm shift in the way that the common soldier thinks has come about.
Well, again, with going back to your article, which is the centerpiece of what we're doing today and what we had done in our last show, what we saw at Abu Ghraib, what kind of payoffs were there? Was part of it desensitizing us? Did it really reveal something ugly that we chided where our military leaders are going? Like someone said, they weren't well trained. What, to be a human being?
Exactly.
Come on. So what's the deal with Abu Ghraib? Why did it get into the media? What is your take on that?
Okay, well, in his book, The Power Elite, which is a virtual tome about the so-called ruling class, the oligarchs, C. Wright Mills contends that the power elite wield control over the military. And with the Abu Ghraib incident, we see the suggestion that the elite supremacy doctrine has been transmitted to the military. And I want to let the audience know that there may be several transmission belts for this. More than what my article could go into, and more than length and time allowed. However, the one that I identify is in an article in Parameters. Now, it's important for people to realize that Parameters is not something that you go down to your defense commissary while going to buy groceries and just pick up with the employment guides and the retirement life, newsletters and whatnot. It's not that kind of a publication. It's the Army War College Journal, which is considered to be the journal that lays down the doctrine, if you will, that's going to be preached and taught throughout the military. And this article that he wrote for that was written for Parameters, was entitled "The New Warrior Class," and it was written by Ralph Peters, who was at that time a major. And in his article, Peters contends that the United States Army will no longer be facing soldiers, but what he terms warriors. And he calls these warriors erratic primitives that have no stake in civil order. And these are people he obviously feels is inferior. And it's interesting to note his footnotes for this article. Peters has derived a lot from the writer Samuel Huntington, who wrote the Clash of Civilizations, and who is basically a comrade of Zbigniew Brzezinski. So this article can be considered a transmission belt from the elite, this supremacy doctrine, into the military. And Peters suggests that these erratic primitives come from 4 social pools. The first is the underclass. And he considers this someone of little education, who lacks physical attractiveness, and curiously enough, this is someone who is also a nationalist. So we see this attack on people that might have reservations about the whole New World Order concept, about the idea of national sovereignty, and the equating of nationalism with racism, with primitive violent thought. Whereas you and I would understand, Viz, that the whole idea of national sovereignty is actually a separation of powers. Instead of all economic and political and military power being concentrated in one entity, thus ensuring a dictatorship, it's disseminated amongst the various nation states. The second group that Peters attacks is the young dissenters. He considers these to be erratic primitives and warriors as well. He says that they're disturbed by the disruption of traditional institutions that have acted as the glue of society and have maintained civilization's stability. Now, given your and my reverence for the Ten Commandments, and for the different freedom documents, the Constitution, the Bill of Rights, we might as well fall right into this group. And other different groups different institutions that have made up the glue of society, such as family, formal worship systems, and communities. These are what the young dissenter clings to. And these are now being undermined by the elite's establishment of a world oligarchical system, and Peters recognizes this, and recognizes that the elites are pushing us towards a world government, which means the eventual eclipse of national sovereignty. And so he knows that the young dissenters are going to be a problem when it comes to establishing this new system, and so they have become, in essence, part of the warrior class that must be fought. That brings me to the third pool that he identifies as a problem, which is the patriots. Now, patriots have suffered a personal loss, and we see this going back into the 90s when these militia groups were forming and whatnot, which seemed to me to be misguided in some ways, but I can see where their fears were legitimate. We had suffered a personal loss through free trade, NAFTA, and GATT, which induced the loss of jobs and loss of liberty, and oppressive legislature that had come through different such as what Bill Clinton had set up after the OKC bombing. Patriots have problems with these things and have objections to these different aspects, and they're going to stand up and say no. So Peters considers them to be part of the warrior class that must be fought. And the final pool that Peters identifies as a problem is the military men that come from what he considers to be an obsolete military paradigm. They're dispossessed, cashiered, may have been considered failures, basically the Michael New types. If you'll recall, and I'm sure that the audience is familiar with Michael New, who said, no, I'm not going to put on the United Nations helmet and band, and I'm not going to serve under United Nations command. That's at least the impression that I was under when reading the article, that's what his idea of this final pool of so-called warriors was. Someone like Michael New, a person who doesn't like the military's new way of doing things. And the military has become less about national defense and more about being an international police force keeping the rabble in line. Finally, after he sums up all these different social pools, Peters puts forward the way that one deals with the warrior classes, and he gives a two-track approach. The first track is an active campaign to win over the populace, and if you're like me, you'll read that as brainwashing. The second track is an irresistible violence directed at the warlords and the warriors. And we saw this. We saw this two-track approach, in my opinion, employed at Abu Ghraib. The prisoners were treated with irresistible violence. If you'll recall, and if you've seen the pictures that I have seen, there's certainly nothing peaceful, nothing gentle about putting a naked man on a leash or attacking a nude prisoner with an attack dog. And the prisoners, the idea that you could rehabilitate these individuals was absolutely precluded. There was no idea that these people could be re-indoctrinated and could leave behind the violent impulses of militant radical Islam. So the idea of prisoner rehabilitation was precluded because the Iraqis were considered not soldiers. They were considered warriors. And Peters says, in regards to warriors, quote, "You cannot teach them a lesson."
Wow. Well, so then, what? Let me go back to asking you, what do you think America picked up from the exposure of Abu Ghraib and other forms of torture?
I think that it was in part desensitizing us to the idea of torture, and leading us down the track that Alan Dershowitz has been trying to lead people. Alan Dershowitz being the liberal lawyer who has actually come forward in favor of torture. This idea that yeah, it might be rough, yes, it might look harsh and all, but it's a necessary evil. That's at least the sense that I have gotten from the media exposure when it comes to the channels that I watch, in particular Fox News, which seems to be this haven of neoconservative ideas, and not just the news and media outlets, but also the entertainment outlets. A show that I've watched with some regularity on the regular Fox channel is the television show 24, and they've had no less than 3 mind-boggling torture sequences on that show, all of which were committed, I might add, by the individuals that we are supposed to view, according to the individuals who write the scripts for this show, as the heroes. I think it's supposed to give that the Abu Ghraib media exposure is supposed to desensitize us to the idea of torture, and to give us the idea that while it might be rough, while it might seem harsh, that it is a necessary evil. And again, I believe I said this before in the last show over Abu Ghraib, but it bears repeating. Jefferson said that in government there is no such thing as necessary evil, and that the evil can only be found in government excesses. And so people have to keep that in mind when they watch their television screens and something pops up over Abu Ghraib.
I don't consort with people like this, and so this is why I'm going to take a guess. But I wonder how many out there say it's okay because it's them and not us, as if the ones who are recipients of torture right now, obviously people in other lands, whether it's like, well, too bad, better us, better them than us. Do you think that there was a part of this whole episode that some people could say, well, that's justifiable, that's them, any means necessary?
I believe so. I believe that in recent years that the Arab people have been played up as being individuals who resemble what Peters was speaking about in his article for parameters. Even long before that article was written, I believe they were played up in this manner in the media, and more importantly in entertainment. A person that doesn't watch the news most definitely watches some television show or some movie, and the picture that is portrayed of them is just of this savage brutal individual. And so in the regular common person's mind, the idea is, well, yes, better than us, and after all, they're not like us in any way, and you kind of get the idea that people don't even think that these prisoners that were abused would feel pain like you and I do, but they do, and the problem is that the whole idea in the public's mind has shifted away from these people being soldiers to being warriors, and the definition for a warrior is totally completely different than the definition of a soldier. A warrior is considered somebody who loves war, who loves combat, who loves killing, and just thrives on violence. And when you see an individual in that light, you do have a better them than me mentality, and you do have a mentality that says, well, look, I see the pictures. I see these people being exposed to sexual degradation and to different forms of torture and beating. But I have to keep in mind they're not like me, and and therefore there's nothing objectionable about that kind of tactic being employed when dealing with this sort.
We're going to talk about that Michael Aquino situation in the second half hour. I've not forgotten that. and I want to let you know that we'll be heading down that road. I was left an article in my mailbox at work from a coworker I seldom see, different shift, and person was very, very upset by this story, which ran under the headline, and this was CBS News: CIA flying suspects to torture, ? And when I did get a chance to see the individual, I said, and I'm going to ask you how you feel about this, Paul. I'm saying, that's kind of probably a little misdirection. They want you to follow that down a rabbit hole because they don't have to fly anybody out of the United States to do that. I think that somehow this was made to sanitize so the CIA wouldn't do it here on our own home soil or down in Gitmo or wherever Padilla is, and so how do you feel about that? Do you feel that this was not necessarily a red herring, but somehow this removed us from the fact that we do this, at home?
It makes us look at, it makes us shift our eyes away from things going on here in our own country, and makes us begin to look in other regions of the world when real, honest-to-God, legitimate atrocities could be perpetrated right under our noses here at home. While you're looking at planes taking off for other countries, where the laws against torture might not exist, so that these prisoners could in fact be tortured. Here at home, we have protests going on against different things that the public finds objectionable, and in response to these protests, the police will come out, and the police have become increasingly more militarized, and will use all these different devices on the crowds, that some cause nausea, some induce different sorts of pain, and I would suggest that these are just as much legitimate examples of torture as somebody sitting over in a cell in Peru being shocked or being drowned is a legitimate example. I believe you're right on with that, Viz. I think that it is meant to distract. That's not to say that this hasn't gone on. That the Central Intelligence Agency doesn't bring these individuals over to other countries where the human rights are more laxed and whatnot. But we have to always be looking at what's going on in our own backyards when the media wants us to shift our attention away from home.
Well, look what's happened in the last number of years with the way protesters are treated. And here, once again, we have the yin and the yang. They have a peaceful protest, mostly directed toward, the G7 or G8. And all of a sudden, these, strange anarchists pop up with ski masks on, dressed in black, throwing garbage cans through windows, acting like idiots. Then they withdraw from the scene, and coincidentally, guess who shows up but the police? And they let loose on the peaceful protesters while this strange anarchist group just sort of disappears. And they follow that scenario, not only in the United States, of course. They had a nasty situation out in Italy. But are we realizing what's happening? I mean, with that Republican national in New York, Alex Jones did a pretty nice piece on that. Took his film, took his camera with him, and got a lot of this that people don't see on the news. And I'm saying, look how we are being treated. Now protesters have to go off to some pen and exercise their free speech, from behind chain link fences. I mean, have you watched how this has also happened in our own country with this feeling of, go ahead, let the dogs loose on them?
Yes, I have. And people don't realize how the First Amendment to the Constitution in the Bill of Rights is seriously been affected by this, by all of this, these so-called needed measures. They pass them off, hawk them off as measures that are needed to keep a crowd in control and whatnot. But when you look at these different technologies that are being used and the different strategies that are used against the protesters, many of which, like you said, are not the violent factions of the protest and all. what you see is not so much an attempt to keep a crowd in check as much as it is to conduct a war on dissent. And when you have a war on dissent, you have a war directly on the First Amendment to the Constitution. The idea of freedom of speech, of peacefully gathering together and voicing one's disdain for something or objections to something that might be going on. That's what we're seeing with this. Is we're seeing a war on dissent and thus a war on the First Amendment to the Constitution.
Once again, this is the Grassy Knoll and Dade City Micro Radio. We have with us Paul Collins, his books, The Hidden Face of Terrorism and the Ascendancy of the Scientific Dictatorship. What we're talking about in this Part 8 of the series, Magicians of Mutability, is the article that he wrote, and that's still up there on Paranoia Magazine, is it not?
Yes, that's correct. It's still up.
Okay, and what is the formal title of that? I just keep referring it to as the Abu Ghraib piece, but...
The title, gosh, now it even slips my mind.
Well, I don't feel so bad.
It's called the Psychology of Abu Ghraib, and all they have to do is just www.paranoiamagazine, all lowercase, all one word, .com, and go to the articles section, and it's right there under the articles listed under the author Paul Collins. It's called The Psychology of Abu Ghraib.
Also, I just want to throw this out, kind of a light note before we get back into some heavy business. I see that in that article you quoted Eric Margolis from the Toronto Sun. Did you ever speak to Eric?
No, I haven't. I quoted Erica Margolis also in my book, The Hidden Face of Terrorism, because he pointed out an interesting aspect to the Northern Alliance characters coming in and replacing the Taliban that I had not seen and that most researchers haven't seen, where it's essentially a reestablishing of the regime that the Afghan war was supposed to get rid of. Those communist sympathizers, or maybe even communists themselves, some people that were loyal to the Soviet Union, government that was friendly to the Soviet Union, being reinstalled there in Afghanistan, which does away with this whole idea that the movements that we had in Afghanistan post September 11th were about bringing freedom and the ideas of democracy and constitutional republicanism to that region of the world.
Well, before I'll get back to Eric in a second. It wasn't a real big deal, but also this drug trafficking globally, which was reinstituted when they got the Taliban out of Afghanistan, that also may be behind the story. And I'm not saying the guy's a great guy, but Milosevic might have been, shall we say, damaging to global drug running into Europe, done mostly by apparently the KLM, and then they made him the demon, because he was going through this ethnic cleansing, which they may have been also. But the point was that he was interfering with global drug trafficking, and he had to go. Did you pick up on any of that at all?
Yes, actually I agree with you entirely on that. Milosevic had been, I haven't kept up with his case, but last time that I had been watching about his trial being held, he was very eager to get up and to speak on this issue. It's almost as if he just wanted to spill the beans entirely, and I know that they were hesitant to let him speak his mind. But like you said, the KLA over there, where in that region of the world, were and still are some of the biggest drug dealers, and have a heavy muscle when it comes to the international drug market. And it's also interesting to note something that was pointed out by former DEA agent Michael Levine. Mike Levine points out that the KLA was actually received support and training from members of Al-Qaeda. And so I think it's exactly like as you stated it, and I think that Milosevic knows more about this than what we're being told in the media, and he's really eager to share his share what he knows about this now. What's he got to lose anyways at this juncture, and to just spill the beans and to bring this whole pyramid crashing down.
Yeah. Well, by the way, the brainiac that I am, what did I say? I said the KLM. I only just insulted an entire airline. But
That's all right.
I don't even know if they're still running. I'm not sure. But anyway, yeah, okay. I knew I'd come up with that anagram somehow, some way. Also, one last word about Eric Margolis. You're going to love this. I nearly swallowed my tongue when he said this right at the end of the interview. And he was with us for an hour. He's really pretty fast-paced and a lot of fun. Didn't agree with a lot of stuff he had to say, but that doesn't matter.
Yeah.
But at the very end, here's a guy who considers himself, a Republican for the most part, a conservative, and one of the last comments he made. Oh, by the way, also he thinks the Vatican is great.
Yeah.
Well, he went to, where did he go to school? Yeah, he went to Georgetown, I think. I don't so you understand where that's coming from.
Mm-hmm.
But the Vatican's great. Schwarzenegger's great. And the thing that blew me away is he goes, and you know what? We've got to get rid of these national sovereignties and borders. And I'm saying to myself, I have never, ever heard a Republican conservative ever get involved with that. So I was like, gulp, anyway. It was a good interview. If anybody gets a chance, check that out to see his take on things. He's spending a lot of time in Afghanistan and India also. Now, back to this thing about tribunals, which is what Milosevic is undergoing. This is the new international law without a jury. And this is one of the things, and we'll talk about this in part 10, I think. I like to keep most of it for that. Paul, it's like slowly we're getting involved in this internationalism, which is undercutting the Constitution, because they talk about these tribunals. And when you have a tribunal, like you saw in Nuremberg, sorry, no juries. And that's a very scary element that's starting to seep in, where you can be this I guess, citizen of the world and tried anywhere or under any kind of law other than your own.
That's correct. That's absolutely correct. The Constitution, what we have made provisions for us under the freedom documents is a fair and speedy trial by our peers. Well, it's not going to be your peers that oversee your case or hear the case for and against you in an international tribunal. It's going to be made up of individuals that may be unfriendly and hostile towards your country and towards your values and thus towards you. I personally would not want to be right now currently in a courtroom where the jurors were made up of French and certain Middle Eastern countries, because right now, whether good or bad, right or wrong, they hate us. And so, what we have is this danger of the individual's right to a fair and speedy trial by one's own peers being thrown out the window. And the Milosevic case is supposed to set a precedent for this, a precedent for the idea of having a court that supersedes any national court and is basically made up of judges from other countries and is essentially a court of the world. Whether it ends up being the ICC or something else, I don't know, but I do know that the blueprint is there, and it's been spoken about in several different elites tracks and different elites predictions for the future. So we know that that's desirable, and we know that's what they want, and that's what they're working for with cases like Norlos's case, providing precedents for the idea of this kind of a court.
Well, every so often, I look at Harry, and one of us invariably will ask the other, like, where's Noriega? Where's Milosevic? where do these people go? I mean, so anyway, you know where I'm going with that, and enough said. But I mean, they're sitting on a lot of people, not in the spirit of the United States Constitution or its legislation. I want to go back to the Peters. By the way, did you cite a particular issue or date that article was in, and what is the title again?
The title of the article is "The New Warrior Class," and it's in Parameters magazine. And once again, I want the audience to know that that's not something you're going to pick up at the defense commissary or at the mess hall. That's an article in the Army War College Journal. So this carries clout. It carries weight. It was. The copy that I had, I got off of their archives on the net that you can get at parameters.com, and it was written in 1994.
Okay. Also, when you're there, folks, if you're going to go check that out, and you also can run a search on this too with Ralph Peters, plus whatever parameters. He also had an article which knocked my eyeballs out, and that was from summer's 1997, entitled "Constant Conflict." And I'm thinking to myself, well, Trotsky couldn't have said it any better. Before we go into the Aquino situation that we're going to finish up with, is that okay with you?
Yeah, that's fine.
I mean, I'm looking at this guy going, what are you thinking about? I mean, just 3 real quick clips. And this is, again, from Constant Conflict by Ralph Peters, on the same website from which Paul was reading from the other article. He says, we're entering a new American century in which we will become still wealthier, culturally more lethal, and increasingly powerful. We will excite hatreds without precedent. Beautiful. Later on, he says, we will outcreate, outproduce, and when need be, outfight the rest of the world. We can outthink them, too. And then lastly, I mean, this is some kind of rhetoric. The advent of this new information age has opened a fresh chapter in the human struggle for and with freedom. It will be a bloody chapter with plenty of computer smashing and head bashing. Holy man, I won't even go on. I mean, it gets, I mean, you can see the guy salivating.
It's enough to put a smile on Irving Kristol's face.
Yeah, and I mean, I'm sitting with this, and I'm not going to deal with it right now. We can maybe visit this in 10. But I wanted to sneak it in also, and that is the connection between Kristol and all these other Straussians that are hanging around who are so right, they're left. I mean, like we said, the Democrats go from one end with the social welfare state. The Republicans go from, crypto-fascists, endless conflict, so it's, both of them get you to the same place, and that's fascism.
That's correct.
Now, one of the things that bothered me early on in the war, and I didn't see too much about it later on, and again, I don't know, this goes back to World War II, and other places, I don't know. But I was getting snapshots, again, back through the internet, and I was seeing soldiers, given the satanic horns, the index finger and the pinky hook, right? I mean, that ain't Texas A&M, guys, or Texas. And also, I was seeing trucks with the beast on it, or helicopters with 666. And I'm going, what is going on here? Now, I do not know a lot about this. You asked me, so I'm giving it to you for the rest of the show. And that is there a cult of evil? Is there Satanism? I mean, is this part of now the perfect killing machine? What is going on with that?
What I think that we're seeing with this trend that you're talking about, I don't think that we're looking at anything that is coincidental in any way whatsoever. There is a satanic tradition within the military that I trace back to a very influential individual named Michael Aquino, who was in the military and was at the Presidio, and this individual was an adherent to Anton LaVey. He became disenchanted with LaVey and eventually broke with LaVey because he found that LaVey just didn't take his Satanism serious enough. He didn't like the vaudeville antics. He didn't like people like James Mansfield or several other different Hollywood celebrities coming into the fold and just making a circus out of the whole thing. He wanted hardcore, real, honest, orthodox, if you will, religious fervor when it came to the topic of Satanism. So he formed what was called the Temple of Set. And the Temple of Set was in the military, and there were several practitioners in the ranks of the military that belonged to the Temple of Set. And what eventually happened was that Aquino was accused of having molested and sexually mistreated children at the military base there, the Presidio. And there's an excellent article from the San Jose Mercury going back several years, written by a very gutsy lady named Linda Goldston. And I believe that anybody can drop her name into the search engine on the World Wide Web and find this article archived by somebody. I forget where I received my copy, but Linda Goldston wrote an article called "Army of the Night" that documented this whole affair. These children were coming home with sexually transmitted diseases, and what I'd ask the audience is how are you going to tell me that these single-digit aged children are sexually active and sexually promiscuous? You know, something was obviously going on here, and they were identifying Michael Aquino and associates of Aquino as being involved in this whole thing, and as having been involved in molesting them. Linda Goldston ended up going to several the places where this supposedly took place. She went to a bunker and found occult paraphernalia in this bunker, and found several different features and aspects that matched up to the children's accounts, but the Michael Aquino was never, or Aquino, or however it's said, was never found guilty. The military was very hush about it and just quietly drummed him out of the military. But what we see with Abu Ghraib, and what we see with the different things that you spoke about, the flashing of the goat of Mendes symbol with the fingers, and once again, not everybody is a Texas Longhorn fan. Right. This is obviously has meaning and significance far beyond athleticism or organized sports. What I believe we see is a continuation in the military of this Aquino satanic tradition. And if you look at the pictures of Abu Ghraib and the different things that went on there, you can see a kind of method to the madness. For instance, and I won't get too graphic because we don't need to go there too much, but one of the more milder things that we can talk about is these soldiers' nude bodies being piled up into the form of a pyramid, and what that semiotically suggests, is several different occult ideas. We also have, basically the reduction of human beings from the level of human to the level of beast by putting leashes on them, by making them do different things that only animals would do, and that's the core precept. That's putting into practice the core precept of Satanism, which is that man is a beast. And so, while I want people to consider, and of course that's why I wrote the whole article, the idea that with Abu Ghraib we were seeing this elite supremacy doctrine transmitted into the military and being put into practice by the military. I want the audience to also understand and consider that this could very well be a manifestation of that Aquino satanic tradition once more in the military, and a continuation of that. And if that's the case, then we have several different questions to ask. Why didn't the military establishment clean out their house in the name of religious tolerance, did they keep did they allow this tradition to go on, even though it's obvious that such a tradition is not protected by the First Amendment to the Constitution. We do have freedom of religion, but it also should be noted that your freedom's where my nose begins, and we just don't see these practices being covered by that First Amendment protection.
All right. Well, again, I referred before to the situation of Fort Bragg, where soldiers kind of flipped out in a percentage that you don't usually see. And now I'm thinking back. You got me thinking whether or not there was some element also that Satanism was mentioned. Can you think back at all to that? Does that ring a bell with you at all?
Well, I know that Fort Bragg has also been mentioned as far as CIA mind control experiments and possible continuation of MK Ultra, and we know that MK Ultra had an occult aspect to it, and so occultism might have played in that respect. And then, but then also, once again, it could have been this Aquino or Aquino tradition being carried on there as well. I've heard some of the most craziest tales and different stories coming out of Fort Bragg, to the extent that you're like, good grief, what's true and what's and what's just imagination here. I can't see all of it being made up, but something is definitely going on there, and it either goes back to these MK Ultra experiments, which would bring us back into the occult, or to the Aquino tradition, which also brings us back to the occult. In which case, both roads lead to Rome, don't they?
Yeah, and we haven't talked about yet about MK Ultra, and a lot of people think that that's crazy. And what I do is I keep around a printout of the Senate subcommittee hearings that Frank Church led. I think that was back in around,
I think that was 76, wasn't it?
77, yeah, 76, 77.
Yeah, the infamous year of intelligence, because this outpouring of all these different revelations and whatnot.
Well, I heard on Black Op Radio a couple of years ago, I believe the gentleman's name was John McCarthy, who was in the service and was up for supposedly killing, I guess, a Viet Cong. He might have been a double agent or whatever, but anyway, he mentions that, I guess, in answer to one of the questions that were put to him, that MK Ultra was like started right after World War II, and it might have something to do with Operation Paperclip and bringing over people like who's the one that worked on it out in Area 51?
Bob Lazar?
No. This guy was a German, Mengele.
Okay.
Mengele was intrigued by this, and reportedly he went out through the rat line to Area 51 and worked on this. So MK Ultra has a pretty long past, but nobody really hears about it. And what's interesting also is they had Stansfield Turner before them, and he admitted that, yeah, it does exist. Do you want to give a thumbnail as to what MK Ultra does?
Okay, MK Ultra was basically the experiments conducted by the Central Intelligence Agency, and I won't go too far into it because this is really something that Philip wanted to touch upon.
Okay.
And all, but still, it bears mentioning. It's important, so we do need to look at some of this. Using the pretext once again of communist encroachment, which was one of the favorites of the establishment. The Central Intelligence Agency said that they had to begin doing experiments into mind control and into creating a Manchurian candidate. And once again, this this went back to a fear of communism. Cardinal Manzetti, who his so-called confession was considered to be under some kind of duress from, was brought about through some kind of mind control practices on the part of the Soviet Union. So the idea was, well, if they have it, we're going to have to enter into a race with them for perfecting it, to kind of just like the arms race that we had at the time with the Soviet Union. So the through the Central Intelligence Agency, and through these different conduits that the Central Intelligence Agency had, these different doctors were brought in, and different ways of different methods of mind control were considered and were put forward, mainly dealing with drugs, LSD. There was one very famous case where an individual who was given LSD without his knowledge, and ended up either jumping out a window or being flung out a window, depending on what you believe concerning that. I believe the man's name was Olson.
Yeah, it was Frank Olson, and he had been at a party and he had been dosed without his knowing it.
Exactly.
But that supposed suicide was a result of him being enough destabilized that he was going to go up and seek psychiatric help. And it's widely suspected that probably 2 or 3 people grabbed him and threw him through the window out onto the street.
That's correct. I have a tendency to believe that he did not commit suicide. That it was a James Forrestal-like situation, if you will. Mm-hmm. And but that's what MK Ultra was all about. And MK Ultra does not exist in as far as that name goes anymore, but the whole project and the whole race did not cease to exist. It went private, and it went into several different private sectors, and it did involve some occult practices in the hope of creating a Manchurian candidate. And I'll let Phil basically dig into that next time you speak with us. It involves the Human Ecology Fund. It involves B.F. Skinner's writings and whatnot. But it's such a voluminous topic. People really need to look into it. And there's even questions right now if this whole thing that's going on with Jeff Gannon, who many people believe is Johnny Gosh. Mm-hmm. If that isn't in some way a continuation of MK Ultra through another project which people believe to be called Monarch.
Right. We're coming up on the end of the show, and also for that Frank Olson story, you can just put that in a search engine, and you will find the son who is continuing as much of an investigation as he can do into the death of his dad. I see one other thing, and you just jogged my memory. And we can go out on this. Harry and I were talking about this. We couldn't scratch our memories for what the deal was. Forrestal was off, was he not?
Yes. The thing to realize with Forrestal is that the administration